you know, when you look at potential acquisition targets, you'll see some guys who are at the median of the market in their local area. You'll see guys that are priced highly. And then you'll see some guys that have kind of lagged from a pricing perspective. What does that mean for somebody like you? Do you look at it and say, well, we'll be able to raise prices after we make the acquisition? Or do you look at it and say, well, raising prices will probably lose customers, it's complicated, I'd rather go out and buy somebody that's got a lot of pricing power? How do you think about that?
It's both. I mean, our approach isn't to kind of take the keys to the company on day one and go out gangbusters and increase prices, right? It's a slower process. Sometimes we wait a year. But what I was getting at is if, you know, let's say we find a target that's 30–40% below market or below kind of where we're at, that's going to take time, right? And the returns on that investment you know, it's going to be a lot more extensive. So we recognize that most independents are going to be below we are, and that's okay. And so if there's a turn or two of pricing that we have to do, we're comfortable with that, and we've got a playbook for that. And we build in the attrition that we think we're going to get from that. We've done so many deals in the U.S., 80, 90 deals, that we've got a lot of data, right, that we can leverage to kind of dictate what we think is going to happen. But again, if it's a company that has never done a price increase, right, and it's got legacy customers that are 50% of what the market today dictates, that's a tough acquisition to do, and a tough acquisition to get returns on. So pricing is important. You know, like I said earlier, if we're going into, you know, the people side of the business is always important to us, right? Because we're growing and we need the support. And you know, we obviously recognize that it's a people business. It's not just a book of business. It's the people behind the scenes that are driving that business. So we're always focused on talent that we're bringing over. And even particularly if we're going into a new green space, or, you know, maybe it's a branch for us that's been struggling to scale, right? Hasn't had the right leadership, hasn't had the right people to kind of drive that business. We want to know, you know, who are we picking up, right? Who's the middle management? Even down to the technicians, right? Do they have a long tenureship with the company?
How does a guy like you suss that out on the onset? Like, you're looking at materials, you're clearly not sitting down with employees. It's hard to be, you know, at the 50,000-foot view and really determine that. But so what are some sort of assessments you make when you're looking at things?
You're right, it's hard, right? Because usually you just have access to the owner, and maybe they're bringing, you know, their right-hand person into the deal, and that's it. And so it's really hard on paper to assess the culture of the company and the people side of the business. But we spend a lot of time and diligence with the owners, right? Asking the right questions on kind of who's second in line, who's the middle management, all the way down to the technicians. How has he hired? How has he built the team? How involved is he or she in the business, right? If they're more removed, right, and we can kind of get a good feel on that, then we know there's a strong team behind kind of running the day-to-day operations, right? And so it's always impossible, right, to understand fully everyone in the organization. But just as much as we kind of examine the numbers, we spend a lot of time on our people diligence and on trying to understand, okay, who are we getting from this deal, and how are we going to be able to fit them into our platform or our branch that this acquisition is going to fold into.
So you're looking at recurring portfolio, you're looking at relative pricing, you're trying to understand the people, which is an important aspect. What are some other things you're looking at?
Revenue composition. So, you know, by and large, we're a general pest control company, right? Obviously, we do termite and some other ancillary services, but, and you're very familiar. In the past, we've bought companies that we've had to kind of restructure a little bit because they were doing stuff outside of pest control. That takes work, right? That's distracting, and reorganizing that it can be a challenge. And so, for the most part, we want a very tight business that's pure play pest control. We love the termite business. Wayne's and Turner does a great job with that down in the South. And so revenue composition is important. Retention, right? We've had a lot of opportunities together looking at some of these heavy growth companies, and you know, when you just look at the papers, the numbers on the paper, everything looks great. It's up and to the right and growth, and but how well, you know, how solid are those customers, right? Are they just good at selling and not really good at delivering service, and so they've got a retention issue? We spend a lot of time looking at retention, going back 2, 3, 4, 5 years. How has that trended? Why are the customers canceling? So we spend a lot of time going into the company system and trying to kind of gather the raw data and dissect it and try to understand at least how the business is progressing through that growth. Is it sustainable? Or am I going to have to hit 30, 40% growth the next year to sustain the portfolio?
How does somebody like you think about, when you talk about retention, so it's clear Anticimex really spends a lot of time understanding historically how has this company retained its customers. What sort of methodologies are you using to make those assessments? Are you looking at kind of open and closing portfolio where you say, okay, here's the number of customers I have on January 1. How many of those same customers exist on December 31st? Are you looking at monthly churns? What's the methodology that you like to use personally?
Great question. A little bit of everything, but ultimately it's kind of how you laid it out. We like to see, okay, what did the portfolio start with at the first of the year, and how well were they able to retain those customers through the end of the year. We do look at month to month and some of the growth in year to try to understand what they're selling and who they're selling. But when we look at, if we're going to look at one retention figure, it's what did you start with, what did you end with?